Okay, to kick off our conversation about grays, let's start with a visual exercise. Here's two swatches of color, and now I'm going to put two swatches of gray inside those. And I want you to tell me, silently, which gray appears warmer and which gray appears cooler in context. Okay, here are two more colors and two more swatches of gray, and do the same thing. Which gray appears warmer, which gray appears cooler? The twist is, those were all the same gray. I didn't change a single pixel. Let's take a look at our original example. Certainly these grays look different, right? To me, the one on the left looks warmer than the one on the right. And it's an illusion. They're the same, as I said, but the reason this illusion works is because grays operate in context in exactly the same way as the other colors we've looked at operate in context. That is, they can go warmer or cooler. But grays do it in a much more nuanced, subtle way. Grays are kind of like the chameleons of the color world. As we've just seen, the same gray can look warm or it can look cool, given two different contexts. With that in mind, let's revisit this whole idea of going from warm to cool. Like we've already shown, we have this method which only uses hue. The saturation, that is the intensity of the color, is fixed. Each one is the same. Then we have this other method where the saturation changes and we transition from warm to cool using grays. This adds another layer to our thinking about color. No longer are we only considering the color wheel, but now we're also considering what exists in between the color wheel. To show you what I mean by that, here's the color wheel, but let's pretend we have a painting that doesn't use all these colors. Maybe we have a painting that just uses these colors. We still want to get from yellow to red to blue, but in practical painting purposes, there's often not room for a whole candy colored painting. Like, you don't always just want to use all the colors in the color wheel because you'll end up with a bunch of just visual noise, everything competing. So what we can do is we can take these colors and use the relative stages of saturation between them to place them. So let's get right in the middle. You'd have, in theory, you'd have this gray, right? This perfectly zero saturation gray right in the middle. And then, with the color picker here for reference, you can see how I can place different swatches within this field in order to arrive at the colors I can use to play with this palette. And what I'm arriving at is a field of grays, that is, colors with different values of saturation, and of course different hues as we fade from one to the next, that I can use to transition between these colors. Now this is where painting becomes very nuanced, because all of a sudden now we're comparing things in a very much more intricate way. We're no longer just blasting people with color. We're not saying yellow turns to green, which turns to turquoise, which turns to blue. Now we're saying, like, okay, there is a yellow right here, but look at all these variations of yellow that exist, and look at how beautifully and subtly they transition as they travel out from yellow. Look how more subtly they transition out to blue. Okay, now it's impossible to say what's yellow and what's blue. Like, obviously this is yellow here, but like, is that color there yellow? It's certainly derived from yellow, but it's not as yellow as like the mother color, so to speak. It's all a visual context now. And that's what grays are so good for. They give saturated color meaning by adding layers of depth to it. Just with this basic example, I've arrived at a very usable palette, and a very intricate and subtle palette that we can use in our painting. And I'll show you how this completely reframes our conversation. Let's take a few of these grays, like let's say this one, and put it up against that one. Okay, pretty clearly warm and cool, right? But now how about if it's like this one against that one? Still warm versus cool, but a little more subtle, right? Well, now how about this one versus this one? I've just sampled two grays that are in the blue side, but this one here certainly looks cooler than that one there, but they're both blues. Look at this. I'll take this blue that we just said is warmer in this context, I'll put it there, and I'll compare it to this. Now all of a sudden it switches. Now that what we said was warmer here is now cooler here. It's that chameleon effect that grays have. So when we speak the language of grays, we are always having a contextual conversation. One gray can only have an identity when it's next to another one. And that's precisely what was happening in this cool light photo. That grass was an orange local color, but as the bluish light hit it, you can see on the left, it created a more grayed down version of that orange. And of course in shadow, where there was no influence of the blue light, those oranges were allowed to get more saturated. Okay, getting back to our example here, okay, even look at like this gray right in the middle, the one that had zero saturation. That's a perfectly zero saturated color. But in this context, we can't tell. This gray to me looks a little green. It has like a green tinge. But the only reason it looks like that is because it's in context with this palette. These grays are having a conversation with each other. And this is the art behind good color use. Here's an illustration of what happens when you just expend every color without any consideration for grays. This hurts my eyes. I'm in pain looking at this. Everything is screaming for attention. I don't know where to look. Every color is trying to be so meaningful that they are all rendered meaningless. It's kind of like it's a room full of screaming voices with no quietness to be found, and therefore it's visual chaos. Now we can breathe a sigh of relief, because isn't this much more pleasing to look at? Far more palatable, right? What once was screaming voices are now much quieter. They're kind of having a conversation with each other. I still don't quite know where to look because I'm still using grays from almost every color on the color wheel. But what I can show you from here is how we can now add saturation into this field in order to focus our attention. Look at that. Now the painting has a nice balance of quiet voices to medium voices to loud voices. I really notice those saturated colors now, whereas in the first example, they were all just drowned out. Can you see how the grays give the saturation meaning? With just color alone, no values, I've been able to command your attention in this abstract painting. Now we can look at some non-abstract paintings and get a greater appreciation for their color use.